As I'm inching closer to my 30s, I've been thinking a lot more about my purpose in life and what I actually want to do with it. And that naturally led me to the topic of passion. What exactly is passion? How do you find something you're actually passionate about? And what are some of the common pitfalls you run into during the whole self discovery process? Because passion is one of those words we throw around super casually. People always say they're passionate about something, but a lot of the time, I don't think our actions really reflect that. And to me, passion is actually something simple. It's something that excites you. It's something you genuinely enjoy doing and something you actually care enough to keep coming back to. One thing I hear a lot when people talk about their passions is that it's usually something that sounds really impressive. Like, I'm passionate about animals, I'm passionate about saving lives, or saving the environment. And obviously, I can't speak for other people or know exactly what they're thinking, but I do think sometimes we choose passions based on what sounds good to other people. Like, we want to say something that makes us look better or makes people approve of us more. And I think that kind of dilutes the whole idea of passion, because passion should be something that is entirely yours. It shouldn't just be something you tell people because you think it gives them a better impression of you. It should be something you actually care about. And I think this kind of connects back to the topic I talked about in my first video about friction. A lot of the time, we don't explore something because we immediately say, well, I'm not passionate about that. But how would you even know? My theory is that we've made passion way more serious than it needs to be. Sometimes it can literally just be, hey, that looks cool, I want to learn how to do that. You see somebody do a backflip, and you think, I want to do one too. That can be enough. It doesn't need to be some grandiose plan for how you're going to change the world. Sometimes you can just be passionate about doing interesting things. I think there was definitely a period in my life where I didn't really know what I wanted to do either. There was just a bunch of things that seemed cool to me. And honestly, in most of my life, I've kind of operated on this very simple motif. I want to do cool things. So I would dabble in things like ice skating, tennis, soccer, basketball, you name it. I even did something called tricking, which is basically where you combine gymnastics and martial arts together. And obviously I never got to the point where I was doing insane corkscrews or anything like that. But I tried it because I thought it looked cool. And over time, I started realizing that not everybody really does this. Not everybody makes that first move. There's this weird first step you have to take where you actually go from that looks interesting to I'm actually going to try it. And I think that step is way more important than people realize. Because people often say they don't know what they're interested in or what they're passionate about. But how are you supposed to know if you've never actually done the thing? You can watch somebody play volleyball and think it looks interesting. But until you actually go play volleyball, how would you know whether you like it? And I think this becomes especially limiting when your default answer to unfamiliar things becomes no. Obviously, I understand that people have different circumstances and some activities cost money, some people have less free time, and some people are genuinely just trying to survive. I'm not saying everybody needs to go sign up for 15 different hobbies tomorrow, but if you're in a relatively stable situation and somebody gives you that opportunity to try something new, why not just give it a shot? Because I think that is genuinely one of the best ways to find things you actually care about. The more you try things, I think the more comfortable you become with being a beginner. And that's honestly a huge part of it. Because trying something new usually means that you're going to be bad at it. You have to be okay with looking awkward for a little bit. You have to be okay with not knowing what you're doing. And I get that for some people, there can be real baggage attached to that. Maybe you had a horrible experience in high school PE. Maybe people made fun of you when you tried something and weren't good at it. That kind of thing sticks with you. But if that happened a long time ago, I think at some point you have to slowly rebuild that confidence. And you don't need to suddenly throw yourself into something terrifying. you can start incredibly small. The important part is just getting into the habit of saying yes to yourself. I'll try it. I'll see what happens. Because every single time you do that, I think the next new thing will feel a little bit less intimidating. When I look back at my own life, I think I've always had a few interests running at the same time. One of the earliest examples I can remember was around grade 7. I was super into programming, and by programming, I mean I was making random batch scripts because I could not for the life of me understand what actual programming documentation was trying to tell me. I would read about return statements and syntax and just be completely lost, but I kept coming back to it. At the same time, I was really into TF2 trading, which stood for Team Fortress 2, because I saw people making money from in-game items, and as a kid, I thought that was the coolest thing ever. It was probably one of my first experiences of realizing, wait, these digital things actually have value and people actually pay for this? Then later on, I kept programming and eventually things started making a little bit more sense. I still wasn't building anything crazy, but I was slowly getting past that stage where I was just staring at syntax and wondering what was happening. At around the same period, I started getting interested in tricking. I remember practicing front flips at school, learning cartwheels, and going to the park after school and trying random tricks. I even took lessons because I thought it looked cool and I wanted to learn it properly. And I think that's the pattern I'm trying to point out. I wasn't sitting there thinking, this is my passion, this is going to be my identity. I just thought it looked fun, so I followed it for a little bit. And now, years later, some of these things disappeared and some of them stayed. I'm obviously not doing tricking anymore, I'm almost 30, and I'm not trying to hurt myself doing a backflip in a random park. But programming stayed. Something I was messing around with in grade 7 eventually became my career. And volleyball is another one. I've been playing 2 or 3 times a week for the last couple of years, and it's something I think about pretty much every day. I constantly want to improve at it. And I'm not trying to say this to show off my hobbies. The interesting part to me is how unimpressive all these things were at the beginning. When I first started programming, I wasn't building apps or systems. I could barely understand syntax. The sports equivalent would be picking up a basketball and spending all your time figuring out how to dribble without ever actually playing the real game. That's basically where I was. But I kept coming back to it, and eventually that tiny interest turned into something much bigger. And I think that's actually the encouraging part of all this. Something really small and inconspicuous can eventually become something that changes your life. But there's no way to know that at the beginning. When I was messing around with bash scripts in grade 7, I obviously had no idea programming was eventually going to become my career. I was just curious. And sometimes all it really takes is giving that curiosity 5 minutes. Just exploring it a little bit, saying, I'll give this a shot, and seeing what happens. Because I think the problem with passion usually isn't that you're somehow incapable of feeling passionate about things, and isn't necessarily that you haven't discovered yourself yet. A lot of the time, you just haven't given yourself enough things to discover. So if something catches your attention, follow it a little bit. You don't need to commit your whole life to it. You don't even need to be good at it. You just have to give it a shot. Because most of the time, trying something and finding out you don't like it is still better than never trying it and spending the next 10 years wondering if you would have.